Yeah, initialize. Very good. Dot new. Another way to think about it, and I love this. Check it out. If we're looking in initialize, we'd remember that self would be the instance because initialize by that hashtag terms is an instance method, right? And dot new with the dot, that's a class method. So if I call like cat dot new, then I would expect like capital C cat dot new. I'd expect like that instance of cat to come out of that from the class's perspective. So there's this little handoff, right? We call new, initialize is actually what runs. Ruby handles the handoff between the class scope and the instance scope so that we call it on the class because we didn't have an instance before we created one. But then the second that it starts getting created, Ruby gives us this nice initialize and we can be in that instance scope. Cool. Question number two. If I wanted to refer to the instance that is currently running a given instance method, where inside of that instance definition can I access that? Like what's the keyword that I can use to basically refer to whatever instance happens to be running a method? Self, yeah, for sure. Nice. It's almost like sounding off, right? Like Sid, self, Michael, self, Emilio, self, Zoe, self. Yeah. Cool. So, yeah, we're talking about self, right? That's okay. Here's another question though. What's the keyword that I would use like inside of the class scope if I wanted to refer to whatever class I was in? Yes. Also self, right? Self is so tricky, right? It's a freaking mirror. Oh yeah, no problem. I know that sometimes you get head down in code. We're just doing some like quick review for those that are just joining us. So yeah, it's self is gonna reflect on the instance if we're in an instance scope. It's gonna reflect on the class if we're in the class scope. That means it's a very powerful tool that can be very useful, but it's also kind of slippery to understand. So I like to always be printing out self, especially when I'm learning new things, just so I can get a better understanding of being able to guess what Ruby is going to see when I write that keyword in there. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that to like kind of warm us up a little bit. And remember that we're back in this object space. We have our tweets, right? We had our runner file that we set up yesterday where we created two users, Coffee Dad and Matcha Mom. We did some testing right here in our runner file as we were getting started to make sure that the username method was working, right? Because when we passed in this string to user.new, that meant it went into user.initialize, right? Or user hashtag initialize, rather. And now we're talking about one instance of user. That instance will have an instance variable username set to whatever argument we gave it. And like with all instance variables, we can get a method called def username that will return that value by using the adder reader keyword. So that's what we did when we tested that out in the runner. We also created a new tweet this way, right? And we also evolved to creating them this way by creating a user method called post tweet that would take the tweet's message. So instead of having to manually create the tweet in the runner, we could rely on the user to do that for us. Of course, within this, we had to use the self keyword because we don't necessarily know which user, as we define this method, is going to need to be passed into tweet new. We know that's going to be context specific. We say whatever user happens to be running this method right now, self is going to refer to that user, and that's how the tweet gets associated. This is the most important concept, I think, of yesterday in terms of who holds on to what, right? Because what we found is that when tweet had a class method called all, by also using those self to take an instance of tweet and shovel it into that class array, that meant that other classes, like the user class, could call on tweet.all and access all of those tweets, right? I think that if I like went onto the internet and I said something like drawer full of shirts, did a little Google image search, right? Yeah, little mental image. Or if we're condoing, right? We might be taking care of ourselves and like loving our items one by one, and we might do this nice little shirt fold. So let's imagine that a person has many shirts, right? Is it my job to walk around all day with a list in my pocket of all of the shirts that I own? That's preposterous. Show if Bang Bangs in the chat if anybody has a list of clothes that they own on their person at this point. Didn't think so. Okay. So what do we do instead? We go to the drawer, and let's say that this was like a community drawer. Let's say that I'm living in like a hostel type situation, and we just kind of like share the limited furniture that's there. So some of these shirts might not be my shirts. I might have a name tag, or like I might have written my name in Sharpie on a shirt, right? That's how I know what shirts are mine. If I ever needed to figure out all the shirts that were mine, I could just rifle through this drawer, look at each shirt one by one, compare the name that I know I have to the name that's written on that shirt's name tag, and I could come away from that drawer with all of my shirts. And indeed, isn't that kind of like what a user is doing here? We go and look at all the tweets that there are, and then we filter out the ones that are labeled with the username that matches ourselves. And through that select, right, combining what we know about Ruby's nice enumerable methods with what we know about class methods and what we know about self, we can come up with a way for a user to hold on to their tweets without having to literally hold on to them. That lets tweet maintain that single source of truth that we like so much, because now if we ever did delete a tweet out of this array, we don't have to go back to the user and change something else here. Right? The user is just going to find one less tweet in tweet.all the next time they go looking. Single source of truth is a very powerful pattern. So today we're going to extend this, right? The fact that the tweet contains the user, like I said, very important concept, that we put the name of the thing that the thing belongs to on the many side, right? We don't have the one side keep track of the many. We have each member of the many keep track back to the one. That's the main thing with a one-to-many, right? So if, for example, I had a tree and the tree had many apples growing on it, I would refer to the tree on each apple before I maybe had like an array of apples on the tree, if I was going to talk about that one-to-many. Or a one-to-many relationship maybe between an artist and the songs that they created, perhaps, right? Would the artist need an array of songs on each artist? I don't think so. I think that the song as the many thing could have like an artist name or an artist that it refers back to, right? So the thing that is had should always speak back to the thing that has it in bulk. So with that concept kind of locking in our one-to-many, let's extend into many-to-many and talk about what many-to-many is. So if one-to-many is that I am one user and I can post many tweets, or I am one tree and I can have many oranges, let's talk about other stuff, right? A many-to-many relationship is where A has many of B and B has many of A. And to ask these questions really specifically, I'm going to put these little articles in front. So this is how I want to ask these questions, right? If I can answer true, if both sides are true, it's a many-to-many. So we can interrogate users in tweets, right? A user has many tweets because I can write a lot of tweets, right? But each tweet only has one writer. Tweet has one user who wrote it. So that would be a one-to-many, right? Because we see the one right here. I might even just capitalize these to show the things that I'm looking at. Let's talk about an example of a many-to-many. So I'm going to put a little no to this. Yeah, this works. So that's not a many-to-many. What is a many-to-many? How about this? A patient has many doctors that they might visit, right? You might have a lot of medical professionals or just a couple that you talk to, but anytime it's more than one, even if it's just two or three, that's still many, right? It's binary. There's either one or there's not one, and if it's not one, it's many. So we have a patient has many doctors, and can a doctor see many patients? Yeah. What's another example of a many-to-many relationship? Let's think about it. A lot of times the things that I miss when I'm in lockdown end up being in this vibe, because it's like things that I would go and do alongside other people, and I could do multiple of those things. Yeah, a teacher has many students, students has many teachers. Sure, a teacher. I'm going to do this. We're going to do a little, say teachers, and so they have a little chicken foot, right? And then students, I'll give another chicken foot here. And this can be a way to say like many-to-many. Up here, by the way, we could say here that like user is one and the posted tweets would be many. because each one only has one user. But a student can have many teachers. Yeah, restaurants can have many customers. Customers can have many restaurants. Don't I know it? I might call Lou Malnati's for lunch. It's literally in my blood, and that's what the coroner's gonna say too someday. Cool. So teachers, students, restaurants, customers. What do I need? Let's see what else. What else could be a thing? These are like very human based. What about like what if we got into like the animal realm, right? We could say that like a cat, and this is like how about this? A feral cat uh, visits many backyards, and a backyard could be infested with feral cats, right? If we're going to do classes, I'm going to do this like Ruby class style, right? So each of these could potentially be, well, if they're going to be Ruby classes, right, then they'd always be singular because that's what class names are in Ruby. So we can mark it like this. I don't actually need the words to be plural to see the many to many. I can see it right here visually. And I think this is a really important skill. I'm starting with this before we get into any code, you notice, because I think that most of the understanding here needs to be happening within and not necessarily by looking at code, because this is conceptual, right? I want to point out that this is a skill that we can practice without having a computer in front of us, which what a blessing, right? When the rain eventually stops sometime in 2023, we can go outside again, and then when we're doing that, we can still meditate on like, okay, so a bird eats from many fruit bushes, right? And a fruit bush could be visited by many birds. What a delightful pastoral image, right? And we just kind of think of these, right? But there's something missing in each of these, and that's what I need to talk about, right? Because how did we model this stuff in data? In the one to many, we figured out that the user didn't need to hold on to the many tweets that it had, right? That each of the tweets could just have one user. As long as we had something that could point back to one thing, then we could store that one thing elegantly, and we would never break the single source of truth principle, right? So now we have a problem. Because if a teacher has many students, that might make me go like, well, a student could then hold on to teacher ID. But no, that doesn't work because a student doesn't belong to just one teacher, right? A student also has many teachers. So then it's like Hall of Mirrors, right? Well, then let's just have the teacher handle it. But it's the same problem in the other direction, right? We just said that a teacher, we don't want to store an array of students here on teacher. We don't want to store an array of teachers on student, right? What we want to have is like a student.all and a teacher.all, and that can be like the reality. I love this. Yes. Nick is so morbid. Delightful. So I think that the key to remember here is that there needs to be something shaped kind of like this. Something needs to point here to one, right? And so how could we handle this? How can like many teachers have many students? Well, what if we did this? What if we made a third thing? This is called a join, right? Because in order to have a many to many relationship, once we detect this and we see that there's like a problem here, then we could have like a situation that always requires a third thing to do this work. So if we want to represent that there is a many to many relationship between things, what we're actually saying is that one teacher teaches many like classes potentially, and like a student attends many classes, right? Now, here's the thing though: does a class belong to just one student? I don't know about that. I don't think class is the right word here. So here's a problem with the join table. We know that this thing needs to exist in order to mechanically handle this thing. Like we need to have the similar deal that we have on a one-to-many relationship where we can get it broken down to the simple unit where we find the thing that belongs to one thing at a time. And I don't think we found the right name for that yet here, right? Because a class does not belong to one student. It could belong to one teacher, so that's something. What about this? What if we just said this? Teacher, student. We literally join the words together. We create an abstract concept called a teacher student, right? And what a teacher student could do is each teacher student could hold on to knowledge of one teacher and one student. So let's say that we had a teacher named P. Adams, and that teacher has an ID of 1. And let's say that we have a student with an ID of 1 that is, I don't know, F Frizzle. And then we have a second teacher who is named like T Davis. And then we have a second student who is named, I don't know, G Yellow. Great. So we have two teachers, two students, right? Here's what teacher student is capable of doing. Teacher student can simply say, yeah, Mr. Adams taught Frizzle, and also Mr. Adams taught Yellow, right? But then also Davis also taught Frizzle, right? And so with something like this, we've in just 3 lines proven that a many-to-many relationship can exist through this join table. Because yeah, gee, yeah, nice. So this here, like we have 2 number 1s in the teacher column, right? So that means that that one teacher number 1 can have 2 students through this relationship. And we also have 2 number 2s in the student column, which means that G Yellow, right, could be taught by 2 different teachers, right? So there's this just this. Now we could really match them all up. We could make a third teacher and a third student. 3 would be like, I don't know, M Bison, and then the student of M Bison would be just Seth, I guess. Cool. So then we'll have we'll have somebody else teach Seth, right? We'll have T Davis teach Seth as well, right? Then I could quickly look and see that like M Bison hasn't taught any students. How do I know that? Because there's no teacher students that include the teacher ID 3. So maybe I say here, let me do this a little more efficiently than I was about to, just to be very clear what I'm thinking as I draw it out. So this is what we're going after, is this awareness that there can be a join, that the only job of each of these objects would be to hold on to linkage, basically, to hold on to one of each. If each teacher student instance contained one teacher instance and one student instance, then we could very quickly like see how these things linked up. Let's talk about restaurant and customer, right? This would be that a restaurant, right, is associated with many visits, right? And that a customer has many visits as well, right? So each visit we could say is like, this is one customer visiting one restaurant. This is Duke going to McDonald's. This is Duke going to Burger King. This is Duke going to McDonald's. And then this is like Kelly going to Aromo. And this is Kelly going to McDonald's. And this is Kelly going to Aromo, right? So like each person can go to many restaurants. And then we heard a couple of restaurants repeat in there. And so we can see that a restaurant can also be associated with more than one customer through this notion of a visit. We'd have one visit where X customer visited X restaurant. In here we'd have like for feral cats in backyards, this could also be called visit. I prefer to think of these as battles, right, perhaps, or maybe a squatting. How about that? Sometimes like an ing word makes a really good join table word. Because like squattings, right, or a squatting is like the notion of like one feral cat choosing to squat in one particular backyard. So from night to night, you might see one given cat show up multiple times with different backyards each time. You might see one backyard show up multiple times with different cats, which would imply that like multiple cats like glomming into that yard, right? And then we could say here that like a fruit bush is associated with many meals, maybe, right? That like a meal, each meal was had at a given fruit bush. And a bird can also have many meals, and each meal is had by a given bird. So by looking at what bird had the meal and what fruit bush happened, we could have many different birds and many different fruit bushes combining together. So this is the concept of many to many. This is one of the key concepts, not only of this mod, not only of next mod, but indeed of like your entire life as a software engineer, right? These relationships between objects are everywhere in real life. And because they're everywhere in real life, customers and clients who need to have code that makes sense to people who live in real life need to mimic these relationships all of the time. The beautiful thing about this principle is that it's going to work in every single like relational data model that we do from now on. So right now we have class.all. Later on we'll have databases. After that we'll have a tool that talks to databases for us. In all cases, the work of understanding this core relationship, understanding what needs to refer to what, is going to fall on us as developers. That's our responsibility to hold on to. So I can't stress enough. This is why we've talked almost for a half an hour before getting into code, because the code itself is actually just a small extension of this. Once we understand this principle, the code kind of answers it for us. So let's see here. We have a separate relationship that we need to have in this code. We have users and we have tweets. Right? A user posts tweets because we have this method post tweet, throws it in there with itself. The tweet can then store the user. It can talk through that user object because we gave the tweet a whole user object that lets us call on username. That's wonderful. And they're connected that way. Let's go back to Coffee Dad real quick, because why not? Coffee Dad is a popular Twitter account, right? 154,000 followers. Oh my goodness, a new tweet from Coffee Dad, y'all. This is a sentimental moment for me, guys. I might actually tear up because I've given this lecture so many times and I can't remember the last time that there's been a new tweet, and it's been the brand breaker. Wow. Fear is an illusion. Something bigger is about to bloom. Touche, Coffee Dad. I'd like it if I could. I can't. Why can't I like this tweet? I have to join Twitter now to let Coffee Dad know that I like their tweet, to let them know that I like their tweet. Twitter needs me to be logged in as a user to like a tweet. If I want to look at who's liked this, I don't even know if I can. I don't even know if I have a Twitter account on here that works. Probably not. I don't even think I remember my password. Nope, it's not going to work. Well, let me tell you how it would work, right? If you click on a tweet's likes, you can generally see like the individual users who have liked a tweet, right? Now this tweet has a ton of likes, so you'd see 5,000 different usernames, right? So what happens is the user comes in and clicks this heart, and their username and their user account become associated with something called a like, right? What else is that like associated with? Well, we can see visually, right? Each of these likes is inside of one of these panes representing a tweet. So if we want to talk about the relationship between a user and the tweets that they've liked, user has many tweets, tweet has one user, that's not a one-to-many, right? Here's another example though. User has many likes, right? And each like belongs to a tweet that was liked. Let's standardize and make sure that we're using singular class names once I've gotten it drawn up, right? So we have like in the middle. Great, everything's singular. I'm trying to be really specific here because if you're not specific with your naming in the diagrams later on, whether you use singular or plural is going to really trip you up. So I'm trying to model like being really persnickety about this, and I think you should be too, first for its own sake and then later on when you see the value. Some stoves you do have to touch on your own though, so feel free to ignore me and lose a lot of time later on. It's your call, but not even a challenge. Honestly, I believe that learning comes from the sting of wasting a little time once in a while and realizing, oh yeah, there was a better way. So yeah, explore. We have a user that has many likes. We have a liked tweet that has many likes. This allows us to now have two different ways for a user to relate to a tweet. I think that's so beautiful, right? That like I can have multiple relationships with the same kind of thing. Think about like on Facebook, I think you can like a picture or you can tag yourself on a picture, but you can also be the one that like created a picture. I think that's how it works still. That's a cool thing that you can do. And you can see things on the web too of like if you have a what else? A wish list for an item, right? A user could purchase an item, but the item could also be stored in the list of items that they want to purchase, right? So we see this all over the place. So don't be shy. Once you recognize that there's a type of relationship, just try to draw it out and make sure that the diagram makes sense. And then if it makes sense in terms of the original diagrams that you drew too, sometimes we have to be more specific with our naming so we don't repeat ourselves. But once we get specific enough to say that like, oh yeah, there's a posted tweet and a liked tweet, we can have two kinds of relationships. So what have we done so far? We've got initialized tweets and post tweet on user. We've got our tweet.all. Tweet can go through the user to get a username, and tweet also, of course, can display its own message. So today, we're going to implement the liking of a tweet. The user is going to have a method called like_tweet that accepts a tweet instance as a parameter. It's going to have a method called liked_tweets that gives us all of the tweets that the user has liked before. And then the tweets are also going to each be able to say, hey, who are all the users that liked this? That's the feature feature that Twitter, in all of its wisdom, is keeping from us. But hey, Dorsey is donating 0.03% of his wealth to SF, so it's great. If I find some change in my couch, I'll toss it in the air as well, as they say on Twitter. Anyways, sorry, I'm petty. Here we go. So we have these three things that we need to build: like tweet, liked tweets, and likers. Let's first talk about the mechanics of liking a tweet, and let's compare this to posting a tweet. Let's make a method right underneath that post tweet. So def like tweet. Okay? And what's that supposed to take in? It's supposed to accept a tweet instance as a parameter. So if it says tweet instance, my brain immediately wants to just say the word tweet, because as a Rubyist, I'm just accustomed to saying the simple noun for the object that we're thinking about. So in order to like a tweet, how's that going to work? Well, the way that we've just modeled this out, we know that we need to build another class. There needs to be a new class called like that's included in all of this. So I'm going to call my shot up here to require relative like. And then I'm going to make a file called like by right-clicking on the overall project, many-to-many, new file button, like.rb, delightful, class like, and we end, def initialize, just to get myself started, right? And because I want to immediately start thinking about what does it mean to be a like, right? The class is there because we have some state that we need to store. If we didn't have a need for instance variables, we literally would not be writing a class. We would be writing something called a module, by the way. We'll talk about what those are. Basically a class that's just methods but no instance variables, all behavior, no state. We have state and behavior, so what does it mean to compose a like, right? What is a like made up of? It says here, let's see, a like should, let's see, a user's ability to like a tweet, a many-to-many relationship, user can like many tweets, tweet can be liked by many users. I'm looking for like a specific instruction of how I'm supposed to build a like here, and I'm not seeing it. But I don't think I need to, right? Because let's look at how a tweet is connected to its user again, right? The tweet belongs to one user, right? So a user then can have many tweets. So if I want a user to be able to have many likes and then be able to potentially get to some tweets through that, then let's talk about how a user could have many likes. A user could have many likes if a like initialized with a user on it, right? Because the user has to be there to do the liking. That's one of the kind of pieces of info that a like constitutes. So let's say a user comes in. Let's also say that like let's say a tweet comes in too, right? Because we're liking a tweet. I'm going to center the tweet here. Nope, it's not going to be called user though. It's going to come in. So the first argument to like, I'm gonna have a like initialize with an instance of the tweet class, and then I'm also going to have a like initialize with an instance of the user class, because since like is supposed to act like a join, kind of like thinking down here for teacher student, I need to have things that each one of them holds on to one of both sides, so to speak. I think of like users over here on this side, and then tweets over here that are going to get liked on this side, and then the like is in the middle, kind of like Captain America with one hand on each side, just making sure that they don't get too separated. So I want to have a tweet object and a user object. I think that like just for like safety's sake, I should just be able to check on those values. That's about right. And by the way, this handles the belongs to part of our many-to-many relationship. When we have a many-to-many, the join table belongs to each side of the many-to-many. When we have a one-to-many, the many belongs to the one, right? Basically, with a many-to-many, there are two ones, right? And the join is responsible for belonging to both of those. So that's the wild thing here. The like now belongs to a tweet and belongs to a user. So then if a user is going to like a tweet, that would be creating a new like, right? Like.new. And we'd have it belong to that given tweet and the given user. Following the pattern from 9, I could put in self, but also thinking about it, I know I'm in an instance method. I'm in an instance method inside of the user class. I could maybe pass in self here. I think that that's going to create a like object that belongs to both the tweet and to me. You know, I'm really not sure why the text editor makes user blue there. It might be a special word too. Like it might be a reserved word in my editor's like decoration settings. I'm not sure. It's a good question. Let's see here. Maybe it is recognizing it. Interesting. Um, yeah, I guess perhaps it's because they got feedback that like if I was doing work on an actual application that the word user shows up so much that I'd like to like highlight it as a different as opposed to different variables. I'm not sure why though. That seems like it would be a very niche request. I'm not sure. So if I'm going to like this tweet in the same way that I'm going to post the tweet, the question still comes down to like making sure that the object initializes with the right info. And as we look at like this heart and we think of the fact that every time the heart was clicked, a user clicked it, and that the heart also belonged to a tweet at the moment that it was clicked, right? So we tracked the user and we tracked the tweet on the app, and then also in our code, we're tracking the user and the tweet. If that's going to happen, I think that we should do a similar thing to what we did yesterday and make our likes searchable. That's the pattern that we noticed, right? That like if the user has many tweets, then the many can be the single source of truth and can hold on to all those instances of tweet, and then I can go searching through the shirt drawer when I need to find my stuff. Let's see. Can I write like underclass? What do you mean, Nick? Oops. Let's try this out. It might just be the user keyword. It is definitely a powerful word. Yeah, it might just be my color settings too. I don't even know what it is, honestly. Anyways, we have likes, right? I want to do a like.all the same way that we did a tweet.all, right? Where we have like a self.all method that returns the class variable. Matter of fact, like I could just bring that in. Now to get that class variable filled, it needs to be fillable. And there needs to be a mechanism of filling. Fun fact, by the way, when we talk about arrays, that technically I could do this. Self, I'm an instance of like, dot class, I'm the like class, dot all, class method, right? So that returns an array, and then I can shovel self into that array. Just kind of a fun thing with like yeah, it's kind of nice. And this also does not require the array to be writable, right? It only needs the array to be readable because we're just summoning the array and then putting something into it. I'm like adding something to a box. I'm not changing boxes. So yeah, you only need a reader for an array if you want to be able to shovel items into it, by the way. Just a fun fact. So this I think should be the nice setup for us to be able to create a couple of likes and then do a like.all. So for this to work, we could maybe test in our runner whether a user is able to call this method. So maybe now that Matcha Mom has posted her first tweet, Coffee Dad finds a potential kindred spirit in the world of someone who likes yummy breakfast beverages and wants to like that tweet. So the tweet is called and so I'm going to have Dad like the tweet. Yeah, good question, Emilio. It just references it the same way that at all would do. It's kind of like I manually wrote an adder reader, kind of, and then I'm just calling it as a method. Yeah. So Dad would like the tweet MMM, and I don't need to pass that in as a string because it's an object, right? It's a variable that holds on to the tweet instance that returned from that post tweet method. Remember that we returned the tweet implicitly here, right? It's the same as if we had said this. But we don't have to because Ruby lets us choose. We have, yeah, let's try this out. If I say dad.like tweet and then I say like.all, maybe that'll show us something. I'm going to quiet down the stuff that I don't care about. I'm just going to run this and see if the last thing that happens is an array that has a like object in it. I think we might be there. Ruby run.rb. Drum roll. Yes. Cool. So that worked. We have a like object in the array of like.all, and now this like is holding on to all sorts of info, right? Because the like has a tweet instance, which itself has a nested user instance. So this like, through this like, we could track back to the tweet, and we could track back to the user who posted the tweet that was liked, right? We can see that Matcha Mom is going to have a new like when she logs in next, right? And we can also see that the like belonged to the person who did the liking, which is Coffee Dad liking Matcha Mom's tweet. So that is, I think, what's required to make this like, right? Now, I know that just because we kind of diagrammed it out, because we broke it down to the point of realizing in a many to many relationship, there has to be a third table to hold on to one of each of the two tables that have the many to many relationship. Or, sorry, an object in this case. Later on, we'll have tables. That's why my words get a little bit crossed up. Because, like I said, the concept is exactly the same. You have a third thing that stands in the middle, it holds on to one member of each side. So how could we go about having Matcha Mom like her own tweet, right? We could say mom dot like tweet and run this back and see what it says. So now we have two like objects. That's that first one that we had looked at before. Here's the start of the second one, and we can see that the tweet is the same. It's got the same message, it's got the same username, and now we see that the liking user is Matcha Mom there. So if we pulled up Matcha Mom's tweet and we wanted to see like how many likes it had, then that tweet should be able to like say, well, you know what? That's not even in the README, but I'm curious how we would do that. Like, could we figure out on a tweet like what's the number of likes like we can see on Twitter here? I think we have enough info to actually do that right now, right? Because check it out, like this like is holding on to an instance of tweet, and that reminds me kind of yesterday because that instance of tweet is holding on to an instance of user. That jogs my memory that like the user was able to do a select on tweet.all, and when the user did that select, it was able to find itself stored in the tweet. So if I'm in the perspective not of a user, but if I'm a tweet and I go looking in the likes drawer, I could pull a bunch of likes out, and then based on whether the likes tweet was me, the tweet, then that would be my likes. So it's the same exact pattern as how the user has the tweets that they posted, because the relationships are the same. Because the most important thing is to recognize that conceptual pattern and then just start looking for like, oh, what's belonging. So in this case, it's the like that belongs. So the tweet needs to go and look for that evidence. So let's do this. Def likes. And I want to find all the likes and keep where I was the liked tweet. Very, very similar, right, to yesterday when we wanted to get our tweets. We wanted to get all of the tweets, and then we wanted to filter for just our own. I really want to highlight these patterns as we go, so I apologize if I'm sounding redundant, but I feel like this is the whole lesson is what's happening in your brain more than what's happening in the code right now. Because the code is actually really, really straightforward, but only when you're understanding of what's going on and why it needs to be connected this way. So for me to find my likes as a tweet, I need to go looking through likes. Like dot all, so that's all the likes, and then we could do a find all or a select here. Those are synonyms. A little review from yesterday. So select will basically iterate over like dot all. So to name this variable, I need to think about what is in like dot all. I have output of that because we just tested it. Each thing in like dot all is an instance of like, so I'm going to name this variable that, and that way I won't get confused. And then, what am I looking for? I'm looking for the likes where the like has a tweet. Like.tweet. Yeah, like.tweet, because we have this add a reader tweet. That should pull the instance that we saved on it. I think that's going to work. And I want to make sure that that is the same as... I'm in the tweet class. I'm in an instance method called likes. I need self here, because this is going to refer to whichever tweet is looking for its likes right now. Let's see. I'm kind of curious. Let's get into a binding.pry this time so we can interact with multiple tweets. We know that has 2 likes, and like fun has no likes right now. What a shame. Fun has no likes. So sad. Fun dot likes. No likes. Dot likes. Hey, that's 2 likes. So this is the same exact thing as when we said like dad dot tweets. Right? It went through tweet.all, it looked through each tweet, it checked on an attribute on the tweet against an attribute on the user that did the posting, right? That the tweet had the same user that dad was, and so therefore we see Coffee Dad show up under the user under each of these tweets. And so similarly, we see this given tweet of the matcha, right, showing up on the 2 likes, same pattern. So let's do this from the user side. If we can see like how many times a tweet was liked. I guess we could just do like mom dot. If we did this like p dot likes dot count, right? The last question I wanted to test was like, can we get a 2 out here? Yeah, we get the 2 for the 2 likes. So that could easily become like a like count, could be like a little virtual attribute. We could just reuse the likes method. We don't need to recalculate. This is the same as if I said self.likes.count. But as long as I'm not doing a writer or a setter method, I can use an implicit self or an explicit self. That's my choice. I guess since self has like been so helpful, maybe I'll be explicit in this case. Yeah, let's do that. Self.likes.count. So now I should be able to like be in pry and then call on a given tweet's likes count and see a real number. That's kind of nice. And fun.like. Great. So that's all working nicely. Oh yeah, let's test this one too, just in case. Great. Everything's expected there. So I want to like pause here and then hop over to the user context because the user also has many likes, right? Because each one of those likes belongs to one user. The fact that there's more than one like means that one user might show up on more than one like. Let's figure out if that's happened. So we could say def likes. And similarly, from the perspective of tweet, we need to look through all the likes. Since each one holds a user it belongs to, we can compare ourselves with that user and keep the ones that match. So that means that we need to first look through all the likes. That's like.all. And we need to filter, right? We need to compare, we need to keep only the ones that match. If I was keeping the one that matches, I'd be using .find, but ones is plural, so I could use find all or select. I'll say find all, just to have different syntaxes so we can see that like we do have choices. Like.all, .find all, do, and then I remember from before that like we named it like because that's the instance that's in that array. And that reminds me that I can call like.user, I believe was what we named it. I can always check. Yep, add a reader user for the instance variable user. And we could test whether that is the same as me. Let's see, many to many. Ruby run.rb. Oh no, a syntax error on line 39. What did I do wrong? Likes. User equals self, like, and, oh, I see it. I ended the loop, but not the method. Okay, so let's try dad.likes. Hey, check it out. There's the like that has the user that matches dad. So this is all really kind of just reviewing one-to-many stuff, right? It's all one-to-many. Now this is the harder part. Let's catch up with where we're at. We've actually done a good bit of this, right? Liked tweet is going well. We need to finish this liked tweets thing. So if we need to go to liked tweets, how could I see all the tweets that I've liked? Well, do I have that info right now? I do, right? I have one like. That like contains the tweet that it liked, right? So that's the tweet. That's all the tweets that I've liked. So what I really just need to do is like for each of the likes that I have, I need to pull the tweet object that was liked. And that's going to be my liked tweets. Let me write that down while it's still fresh in my head. I liked that explanation. For each of the likes that I have, I want to pull out the tweet that was liked. So for each of the likes that I have, that would be, okay, likes that I have, that's like all of the likes, specifically the ones that were liked by me. Okay, so I'm going to call this my likes. That's all of the likes that there are that just belong to me. And then for each of those, I want to pull out the tweet that was liked, and then I want to have all of those tweets. What's the enumerable that I use to do something to each thing in an array and like collect the result into another array? Map. Does anybody know a synonym for map? You could also call it collect, by the way, just like David Arquette in the late 90s. Wow, that's a pull. That's a reference. Let's call mylikes.collect. Same as calling.map. Mylikes.collect do like, because I know that each of these, whether they belong to me or not, are still just like objects. Regardless, I can still use the word like. So mylikes.collect do like, and I just want to get the tweet, like.tweet. Because we saw before from the perspective of a tweet, right, that we can call like.tweet. We now see from here that we can call like.user to figure out if the user on a like is me. And then once we've got all the ones that are the user being me, then we can just take the tweet out of the like. I think this is going to work. Oops. There we go. And let's try dad.liked tweets. Beautiful. That's an array. It's got the one tweet that we have liked. Let's like a couple more tweets to see if that fills up. Let's have dad like one more tweet. Dad.like tweet. Like his own tweet. That's the fun one. Fun deserves a like. And there's our second tweet that we've liked. And we can now see like dad.likes. Cool. So that's from the user perspective, having liked tweets, and then from the tweets perspective, having likers. We could do a similar thing, right? Tweet dot likers def likers. So how are we going to get likers? First, we need to know what all of our likes are. First, get all my likes, then collect each likes user into an output array. So to get all the likes, we need to call like.all again, and we can filter using select or find all, because that's what we need to do, because some of them will be mine and some of them will not, and that tells me like, oh, that's a Boolean kind of thing, that's an if-else kind of thing. Only some of the time do I want something from the input in the output. And that's what tells me I want to have a select, right? And so I'm selecting based on the Boolean of like, is the likes tweet the same as whichever instance of tweet is running this likers method right now as self. And so once we run that select, we could call this like my likes. And then we could iterate over this, collect each likes user. So each one's needs to go into an output. So that tells me that the output will be the same length as the input, but that just some operation needs to happen on each thing in the input. That's my tell that I have a map happening. mylikes.map, I'll do this single line style, why not? Do like, and we can pull like.user. This is probably how I'd write it in a final draft, by the way, because I know that this is like able to be expressed on one line in a really clear way. As a matter of fact, there's even a tighter syntax that you can use. This is a flex, but I'm going to give it a shot. Let's hop in here. Who out here like fun? Nice. Coffee Dad. And then who likes this tweet? Two folks, right? So I'm going to comment this one back out just so you can see. You can look at this syntax. I'd look this up on Stack Overflow if you want more information on it. I just wanted to kind of float this out here because sometimes with map you have a simple enough operation that you just say, hey, each of these things has a method. Call that method. Give me the return value. But it's the same as doing something like this or doing something like this, which might be easier for you to work with, right? Because even if you know that one line could work, you might want to reserve the right to just do one of these as a sanity check, just to make sure that you're actually iterating over like instances. Wouldn't that be a nice thing to do once in a while? Oops, not edit, exit. Go back in here, we call like, as we iterate through those things, we see that each one is a like. Shoutouts to Zelda, by the way. And then we have, a little bit more proof by having the multi-line enumerable. So, but yeah, eventually I learn enough that I'm confident that it's doing exactly what I want it to do, and then maybe I refactor it back to a one-liner there. So in terms of what we needed in the README, I think that we're all set. Like the user now has the mechanic to like a tweet. The hardest part was really reckoning with the notion of what a like had to be, and really kind of flipping from something like this, which is vague and unspecific, and also impossible with how we want to have single source of truth. Right? We don't want this. We want this. I have a little emoji keyboard, so I try to use it. Yeah. So this is the way that we want to express this, because now we're being clear about the exact mechanism of how we're holding on to things. If we wanted to really come back and do this, we could say that if we wanted to like mimic our likes table that we have right now, we could say that the user dad tweet and we could say user mom tweet and we could say user dad tweet fun, right? Because that's what we did in that order, right? That first dad liked and then mom liked and then dad liked fun. And so if we wanted to sketch out what each of these likes would look like in raw data form, we might do something like this. And this really shows us the power of the join, right? If we don't have this third thing, our only recourse would be that the user needed to keep a separate array of its tweets. And that would mean that the tweet would also need to have a separate array of its users. And then what if we also had a tweet.all and a user.all in play? Now we'd have like 2 to 4 different places that we might have to go looking if we weren't sure why data was not lining up right, and that's just too much. But what we have now is just a simple collection of likes. And I think the last thing I'd like to close with is thinking about what a join model might look in real life that you've already interacted with, so that it's easier for us to like introspect on this even when we're not near a keyboard. Sometimes like when my kid went to CPS schools, like I'd go and pick her up from school, or I'd go and visit, right? And when you went into the office, there would be a sign-in sheet, and I could sign in many times throughout the day, and I'd always have to say what classroom I was signing in for, and I'd have to write my name. So we could say that a visitor visits many rooms, and that a room has many visitors, and that we could say that a sign-in is the join where one visitor is signed in to be at one room, right? And that's a real life mechanic of a many to many relationship, and a real life artifact of the thing that's acting like a literal join class, right? That each row on that visitor sign-in form would be like an instance of a visit in our model here. We just saw one with likes, right? I'm thinking of another. Can anybody else think of like a real life many to many where the join has like a physical artifact that you can see? I think with restaurants, like receipts is something like that, right? The receipt might have your credit card number and also say the restaurant's name and address at the top. So a given credit card can purchase at many restaurants, and a restaurant can accept purchases by many cards, and it's through the receipt that we'd see how that information joins together. And then we wouldn't expect each receipt to know about more than one card and more than one restaurant, right? That would be different than what we've seen. Class roster. Yeah, for sure, a class roster, because like anything that's kind of printed, right, and like that list, this thing is associated with this thing. Tables like are really really good. Tabs too, yeah, kind of receipt shaped thing, right? A bar has many drinks, and a drink can be served at many bars, and so on a given bar's tab, you could see all of the drinks potentially that are happening there. I guess you could even also say that like an individual drink could even be on something called a tab entry. And you might say that the whole tab at a bar would be all of the tab entries where there was a certain bar, right? So it might even be like, this is the tricky thing with the join too, is that a lot of times we name the join thinking of how it's listed in real life, but we always have to come back to that single unit. So I always have to interrogate what joins one drink to one bar. And if I think of a tab, that's multiple drinks. So I might even say like tab entry belongs to a tab, and it's the tab entry that does the join. And then maybe if the tab needs to have a name at the top, So we could even draw a diagram where a user has many tabs, right? And a tab has many tab entries, and a tab entry belongs to a bar and belongs to a drink, or perhaps the tab entry just belongs to a drink and a tab, and the tab belongs to the bar. And then through that, we could figure out where the drink was served, but we'd have to connect through like three different kind of objects. This is one of my favorite things to think about, how you might actually model it, and it's probably why I've been able to do this work for this long, because I think that if it's not fun to think about, it can be very, very exhausting. But I find the fun in the work because I see the work in the fun. Honestly, I look around and I see join tables everywhere, and I'd much rather see code in real life and think about it in real time than give my dreams up to it. So I sleep like a baby. I don't dream about code a whole lot, but it's because I'm thinking about code and relationships in real life a little too much sometimes. But I think that that's a good practice to be in, especially today and tomorrow, because I will say the great news is that we've officially covered basically what we need to know, like all of the pieces that we need to put together for next week's coding challenge. So next Tuesday morning, we're going to get together for and spend between 60 and 90 minutes. I think we're going to do it like a 75-minute cadence, perhaps. We'll have more details at the very start of Monday once we have everything fully ironed out on like timings and schedule stuff. But essentially, the code challenge gives you a clock, and then under the clock, you have a few features that you need to build. Some of the code will be there for you. There will not be learn tests to pass. So everything that I've been demonstrating in terms of using my runner file and creating my own objects to test things on, these are behaviors that I'd like you all to be practicing. If you haven't been already, you should be now, so that you're comfortable running your own code and not just letting Learn run your code for you. You should be comfortable creating your own objects, calling your own methods, running your own pry sessions to be able to prove to yourself that your code is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So be ready for that to be the main way that your proficiency will be assessed via the code challenge on Tuesday. The way that our code challenges work in terms of the mod cadence is that it's like the one kind of feedback mechanism that we use to determine whether you are ready to move into the next mod or not. Every mod is harder than the last. There's more complexity, there's more independence required, and you need to really know your stuff from the previous mod before you're ready to go into the next one. So on Tuesday, some of y'all will show up and have an awesome time on the code challenge, and then we'll say on Tuesday afternoon, we reviewed your code, here's some specific pieces of feedback that we have, but overall, we've determined that you've picked up on the basics of how to model these object relationships and how to work with code, and we're confident that you can think through this stuff reasonably enough that you're ready to move into mod 2. And then all that you need to do for the rest of this mod is absorb as much as you can as we go through the rest of our material, which will include databases and introduce us to the active record object relational mapper gem. And then in week 3 of this mod, there's going to be a big project, and everybody's going to pair up and work on projects together throughout the week. Let's say that next Tuesday you show up and you have like a deer in the headlights moment where you realize like, oh, I really don't understand how to do this object relationship stuff, or I can see this stuff conceptually, but every time I need to work with an array or work with a class variable, my brain freezes up. And then I tell you, hey, I saw some stuff come together, but not enough for me to be confident that you're ready to move into the next mod yet. So if you are unsuccessful on Tuesday's code challenge, you still pair up on projects, you still maintain and work through things in week 3, the same as anybody else, but then we're also going to devise a code challenge retake toward the end of the week to just kind of reassess in a similar problem space and see if you've picked up on more of the details over time. That should allow everybody to avoid isolating and needing to worry about like, oh, if I don't do well on the code challenge, I'm going to have to do a whole like solo spin-off thing in week 3. We tried something like that last mod 1. It works in immersive, it just doesn't work as well online. So essentially, Tuesday is a feedback mechanism. It either says you're good, keep going, or it says, hey, keep going, but also check in more and let's make sure that we have some like of the basics ironed out and that we get a little more practice with things so that we are ready to go. And anybody who needs to do a retake, we'll let you know on the Friday afternoon of week 3 if you're ready to move into the next mod, or if you're going to need to take 3 weeks off and then rejoin mod 1 when the new cohort comes in for their mod 1. So those are the kind of 2 outcomes out of this mod, and we start giving feedback as far as how that goes on Tuesday, but Tuesday is not like the be-all end-all of how the mod goes in any means, and I just wanted to say like, thanks to everybody for riding this far through the week. At this point, you're going to see not a whole lot more labs of like brand new material. You're just going to see stuff like fleshing out what we've already done, a little bit more project type stuff, and you're going to have more opportunities to catch up and deepen on the things that we've been covering. So the fire hose is about to slow to a trickle a little bit and then open up more with slightly larger projects that put a lot of things together. Yeah, Monday is entirely devoted to review. So we're not lecturing on any new concepts on Monday. Tomorrow I will have a couple more things to talk about in terms of like basic Ruby, but that's going to be more academic to prepare us for some of the things that'll come up after the code challenge mid next week. All of Monday is just going to be about code review. We're going to have one or two breakout sessions. I strongly recommend that people spend at least part of Monday pairing so that they're holding themselves to that kind of like verbal bar of like, can I talk through this? Can I prove that I'm thinking through this stuff right? Yeah, it's I want to talk about it now so that people can like handle the real stress that comes with it, right? I think test anxiety is real for all of us, and this is the one time that a very non-college type experience can feel very much like other compulsory education stuff that's burned many of us in the past. I think a lot of us are in the seats that we're in specifically because compulsory education has failed us in some significant ways, and I think that that's worth hanging a pin on and thinking about to say, yep, we have to do some sort of assessment thing. Because of that, that's going to bring up a whole lot of feelings about a lot of stuff and potentially a lot of energy around wanting to like move in a direction to handle that and to like get yourself back on even footing. I would just challenge everybody to make sure that they don't fall into the old college habit of like try to appear perfect to your instructor so that your instructor feels good about how you're doing even if the code's not good, because it's all going to come down to code on Tuesday. Does your code run? Does it do what it's supposed to do? Can you write the code in the amount of time that you're given that demonstrates that you've picked up on it? You don't need the whole amount of code challenge time to finish the code challenge if you're up on all of the labs. And if you haven't had time to be up on all of the labs, that might be a sign that like, hey, we do need more time in this mod to make sure that you really are ready to move to mod 2. We're not going to throw anybody into a meat grinder in 3 weeks, no matter what, because this is about you getting a job and not just us feeling good about what kind of grades we gave out. So yeah, it's really just an invitation for everybody to show up with the best integrity that they can and to continue to ask for help and to continue to move forward at their best pace. And then we have this like feedback kind of baked in very, very early in the mod. In future mods, the code challenge happens much later in week 2, right? But we do it so early this mod because if you are off track and struggling, we want to catch that in as many concrete ways as possible, as early as possible, so that we can redirect on that. So yeah, there's no ego in it, no judgment in it. It's just a matter of like we're trying to become the kind of coders that we need to be to move to the next step, and we're trying to get as clear and concrete information as soon as possible about it. So yeah, to that end, if you can handle one-to-many and many-to-many relationships in Ruby, if you can handle object creation, attr readers and writers, passing arguments into methods, working with the self keyword in different kind of scopes between class or instance, and finally working with Ruby's arrays, enumerables, and collection methods and hashes and stuff like that to put all of the concepts together from pre-work with this new stuff when asked, then I think you're going to be in really, really good shape. And that's the whole idea of things. And if you're not, then we'd be able to point, hopefully, at specific spots, right? Hey, you were really good on arrays, but the object stuff, still weak. Or hey, your attr reader stuff, on point. But the second that you had to work with class.all, things started to fall apart. Or hey, you got to class.all, but your select and your map are still really fuzzy, so I saw you using select 2 times instead of select to get to the join and then map to get through it, right? These are all the kind of things that I've seen people struggle on before. I think these are things that you're going to see yourself struggling on as you work through them in labs. So now would be a really good time, if you're not doing this as part of your regular reflection, to be very specific about the areas in Ruby and the areas in OO that seem to regularly slow you down or give you friction. If it's debugging for you, write that down, right? If it's defining classes or defining initialize, write that down. If it's working with arrays and enumerables, write that down. If it's stuff like attrs and self, write that down. Because then you can know which labs specifically to go back and focus on this weekend, or if you know you have a whole bunch of unfinished labs, but you feel really solid on a couple of things, you can gently ignore that stuff and focus on the stuff that you personally know you need to be focusing on. The miracle of a bootcamp education is that everybody brings so much effort and time to it that the skill develops just naturally. So I guess the last note that I would end on is like, to the extent that you've gotten this far into the week and that we're talking about objects and relationships already. Like, it's 4 days in, and we now know how to model a social media app. That's a huge amount of complexity, and if it doesn't feel comfortable for you yet, it shouldn't, because it's brand new and it's happening very, very fast. So give yourself time to keep working through the reps. Take breaks if you feel exhausted. I always recommend leaning on a pair, even when it's not like a pair mandatory day, just to make sure that you're in the world working with this code in a way that is hopefully not as fatiguing or isolating as a lot of the rest of life can be. What questions do people have about the mod, the challenge?